jump so high you die from impact on landing? Maybe you don't think zombies is hard enough and you want 32 of the bastards on round 1 all running full sprint with vending machines that eat your money and berate you afterwards. Perhaps you have aspirations of being a wood-burning stove. No? Then how about a perk machine? Maybe you are an armchair zombies player. Maybe zombies bore you to death. Or maybe it gives you wood or makes you pitch a tent. Well, then maybe you want to play capture the flag with the zombies. In that case, you've come to the right series. I'm Trey, and throughout this series I intend to teach you how to script your wildest dreams into zombies. Like, subscribe, and get ready to program your dream zombies map. Hello viewer, I'm Trey, and in today's video we're going to go over how to create your own custom teleporters. This code will not be using any of the DLC 3 teleporter code. Instead, this will be our own teleporters that function completely differently. So no teleporting to a core from two other teleporters like in Deriza. Before we get started, we have to cover a few things first. First, we need to set up some triggers to use as our teleporters. In this example, I'm using trigger radius, but as we did in my physics mod video, we could use trigger damage or trigger use. As I did in the physics video, I will show you how to make changes to the code to use the other trigger types. Also, this time I will show those other trigger types in action as well. So, let's set up some triggers. In my trigger radius example, we have two trigger radius. I give them the target name of telly_0 and telly_1. This will be important later when we code the functionality. Now, we aren't done yet as we need a location to teleport to, so we need to place a script struct. Note, this has to be a script struct. You cannot use script origin as it will not work. Now we have to give this script struct a target name, and I name mine dests, short for destinations. Now we could copy this script struct around to different locations on the map we would like to teleport to. Note, we are not changing the target name on the copies. We want them all to have the same target name for this. Again, this will be important later. So now we save our map and compile the map so we don't forget later. Now we can move on to the second part of the setup. As promised in my physics video, we are going to learn how to use external scripts. To do this, let's start by opening our map folder in our mod and copy and paste a clone of the Nazi zombie your map GSC. Rename the GSC to something. In this example, I name mine teleport. Now open it up in your editor of choice. I am using Visual Studio Code with the Treyarch GSC extension. Now we need to delete everything. I will show you everything you need in here momentarily. Now we need some hash includes to start, and those are hash include common_script/utility, hash include maps/_utility, and hash include maps/_zombie mode_utility. Those are Treyarch scripts that have some functions in them we are going to be using. Now we are going to create a function called teleporter init. This function will serve as our entry point to the rest of the functionality of the teleporters. In this function, we are going to first call the flag wait function with the argument of all players connected as a string. This will ensure the code does not start executing before the players are in the game. Next, we will thread two functions we will define in a couple of minutes, thread telly_0 and thread telly_1. Now let's move on to our Nazi zombie your map name.gsc and call the teleporter init function. To do this, we have two options. We could hash include map/teleport and thread the teleporter init function. Or we could call the teleporter init function directly, as I've done here, by thread map/teleport : teleporter init. So let's go over both methods and talk about the differences. When you hash include, you are essentially copying and pasting the entire script into the script you do the hash include in. When you call the function using thread map/teleport : teleporter init, you are only getting that function from this other script and calling it directly. No copying shenanigans in the background here. This method is better for cases like this, where we only need access to a single function from another script. This will also cut down on the size of your script because you aren't copying and pasting all of the code you aren't using. Now that we understand includes and calling functions from other scripts, let's head back to our teleporter script. Now let's define the tele_0 function. The first thing we will do in this function is get the trigger for our teleporter. We create a variable called tele and set it equal to the return value of the getInt function, and pass the getInt function the argument of your teleporter name, tele_0 in my example, as a string, and target name as a string. Next, we create an infinite loop. In this example, I used a for with 2 semicolons, but you could use a while with the condition of 1 or the condition of true. It will work the same. Next, we tell the teleporter to wait till an event, and the event is trigger as a string and who. Next, we create a for loop to iterate through our players. For I equals 0, I is less than getPlayers function dot size, I++. Next, we create an if statement to check if the player is touching the trigger. If getPlayers function I is touching self. Now, as you may notice, we are using the getPlayers function in the for loop and in the if statement. So let me explain. As with variables that are equal to a function, it is not actually equal to the function itself. Instead, it is equal to the return value of the function. Well, in this case, when I say I is less than getPlayers.size, it gets the return value of the function, in this case the players. And .size is the amount of players in the array. If you remove the .size, it wouldn't work because the getPlayers function returns the player objects, not the amount of players. And in the if statement, we are using the getPlayers function to get the player object, and the box with I in it is the index in the array of the player. Moving on, inside of this if statement, we are going to thread a function we will define shortly, and that is teleportPlayer. And we pass the teleportPlayers function the argument of the player we want to teleport and the location we want to teleport them to. In this example, I pass the getPlayers function with the index of the player I want to teleport, and the getRandomDestination function that we will be defining shortly as well. Outside of the if statement, we add a short wait. Since we shouldn't be able to immediately hit the trigger again, the wait can be short. Unlike the physics trigger that we could stand in, we get whisked off somewhere else when we touch this one, so a long wait isn't needed. Anyway, next we thread yet another function we will define later, and that is the updateZombiePath function. Note, this is kind of a hacky fix and works with varying results, but is meant to fix the zombies' pathing when you teleport. When teleporting, they can sometimes, or most times, start acting like, "Come on, say it!" like brain-dead zombies. With that out of the way, let's start defining our functions, starting with the getRandomDestination function. This function will, as advertised, get a random location to send us to when we activate the teleporter. Remember how we named all of our script structs the same target name in our map? Well, this is so we could use the getStructArray function. So, the first thing we do in our getRandomDestination function is create a variable to store the destinations with the getStructArray function. We pass the getStructArray function the arguments of dest as a string and target name as a string. This will make our variable an array filled with the script structs we created earlier. Next, we create a new variable to use for selecting a random location to send us. We set this variable equal to the return value of the randomIntRange function. We pass the randomIntRange function the arguments of 0 and dest.size. For those who aren't aware, arrays start at 0, so 0 is the first slot in the array, and desc.size is the amount of slots in the array. Because we named all the script structs the same target name, we can have as many of them as we want in our map, and this variable will always have all of them. Next, we return the random destination with return dests and dest in the box. This returns the struct at the index in the array of the random intRange function returned to our dest variable. And that's all for this function, so let's move on to the teleport players function. This one is super simple. Remember earlier we passed this function two arguments of the player touching the trigger and a random destination. Well, we have the two things we need to make this work now. So, in our prototype, we give our function definition two parameters, a player and a destination. Now, inside this function is the simplest code you will write this entire video. We call the freeze controls function on the player we passed in and pass it the argument of true. Next, we call the setOrigin function on the player we passed in and pass it the argument of destination.origin, the destination we passed in. And finally, we call the freeze controls function on the player we passed in and pass it the argument of false. We freeze the controls before the teleport to stop the player from moving the camera into a weird angle while teleporting, and unfreeze after so the player can move freely again. Now, in my example, I have two teleporters, and you could just copy and paste the function, changing the name to tele_1, and do the same for the target name of the trigger. And that is what I did. I should probably explain why we have separate functions for each teleporter. Well, you see, we have a wait till, and this will hold execution until the event is triggered to continue execution. So, we want both teleporters to work independently of one another, or we would have to go to the teleporter we are waiting on first. Then we would have to use the second one before we could use the first again, as demonstrated in this clip. This isn't what we want. We want to be able to use either of the two at will, and having them controlled independently will allow us to do this. And if you choose, you can add in more teleporters by just copying and pasting the function and making the change to the function name and the target name of the teleporter. But hold your britches before you go doing this. You might find I have something better for you later to make your life easier. For now, let's copy and paste making the changes we need for this to be its own independent teleporter. What's this? Damn it, Trey! There you go, making changes to my perfectly functional code. Yes, that's right. We're going to write this version a bit differently because it wouldn't be a Trey Hex video without some unnecessary changes for educational purposes. Now, much like the physics code from the last video, the changes are very minor. We now have a players variable storing the return value of the getPlayers function. We are checking if the index player is overlapping the collision of the trigger. And that's it. We could do the same shenanigans we did with the trigger radius code from my physics video. Now let's move on to trigger damage and see how we could use this trigger as a teleporter. First, we have to set up a trigger damage to activate under the conditions we want. In this example, I again am only going to have it activate using melee damage, so stray bullet or splash damage from a grenade doesn't send us into the Shadow Realm. Great, now let's look at some code, and this one is super easy. We give it the trigger as we did with the trigger radius. We create a variable, user in this example, and set this to undefined for now. We create an infinite loop. In my example, I again used a for loop with two semicolons. Inside the for loop, we have the trigger wait till an event of trigger as a string and user. And we thread our teleport player function and pass it the arguments of user and the return value of the getRandomDestination function. Next, we thread the updateZombiePath function. And that's it for trigger damage. Now let's move on to trigger use, and this one is almost identical to trigger damage. Here, the only difference is we are setting a cursor hint to hint no icon and setting a hint string. But I'm not done yet. Let's also make a trigger use that is buyable. Now, for the buyable variant, we have a few minor changes to make. First, we need to place a cost variable after we set the cursor hint, but before we set the hint string. We need to do this so our string can use the cost variable, as it would be considered uninitialized if we declared it after we set the hint string. This would give you a script compile error. Now we need an if statement after the wait till to check if the player has enough points to purchase the teleporter service. If user.score is less than the cost, we play a sound to tell you that you're a broke bastard. I am using some sound effects I added into the game here, but the commented out section is an effect already in the game that you can use. I will be making a video on adding sounds in the future. So now, if we do have enough, we skip the if and go to the else. In the else, we take the points from the player and send them to a questionable fate. Side note, if you don't check if the player has enough points and just take the points from the player, you can make the score go negative. And finally, update the zombies pathing using the update zombie path function. Don't worry, we're getting to this soon. Well, soon is now, so let's get on to my hacky fix for the zombies pathing. Before we get on with it, we will be using a function I created in another video in this example. I will show you how to create the function later and show you an alternative method that doesn't require the function at all. So, in my hacky path fix is some really simple code that makes use of a function in Treyarch's zombie spawner script. In our hacky function, we create a variable in my example called zombies. I then set this variable equal to the return value of maps nazi_zombie_tutorial : get zombies function. We will go over this too, so contain your excitement. We then create a for loop to iterate through the zombies. In this for loop, we're going to call maps_zombie mode_spawner : zombie_follow_enemy function on the zombie at the current index. And that's it for my hacky fix. So let's talk about the get zombies function. You can create this in Nazi zombie yourmap.gsc like I did, or you could just create it in this script. This is some super simple code we will go over right now. You create a variable called zombies, set it equal to the return value of getAiArray function, and pass the argument of axis as a string. Now we simply return the zombies variable. And that's how you make the function I'm using, but I promised I will show you an alternative way to make the update zombies path function. You may have already guessed from the code we just seen how you could make this work without it. Time's up. If you guessed we set the zombies variable equal to the return value of the getAiArray function with the argument of axis as a string, then you won. Sorry, I'm all out of prizes, but you can have this code as a prize. That might be better anyway. So now we've covered everything about my hacky fix for the zombie pathing, but I'm still not done yet. Now on to the grand finale. Remember the 2 trigger radius from earlier you had to use in order of how they were indexed? Well, have I got a treat for you. You see, I hid a little secret until the end, just for you. So let's jump back into Radiant and make a minor adjustment to those 2 triggers that share a target name. Here we are going to add a KVP, script noteworthy, and give them a name. In this example, I gave one telly_0 and the other telly_1. Now save and compile your map. But we aren't done yet. Time to do some scripting. Now, let's create a new function. In this example, I named it telly_init. Now call this function in your Nazi Zombies map GSC, or call it from the teleporter init function we made earlier, whatever floats your boat. Now we create a variable in here called telly_trigs in my example. Now we set it equal to the return value of the getIntArray function, passing it the arguments tellys as a string and target name as a string. Next we call the array thread function and pass it the arguments teletrigs, and the function we want to call with 2 colons in front of it. Now notice we use 2 colons and do not use the braces like a normal function call. Now let's create another function. In my example, I called this function both trigger radius fixed. Now remember that script noteworthy KVP we added to the triggers sharing a target name? Well, let's create a new variable and use it. In my example, and set this equal to self.scriptNoteworthy. Next, a variable user in my example. I think you know the drill, set this to undefined. Now let's make an infinite loop. Inside our new loop, we do self wait till and pass the arguments of trigger as a string and user. Now here comes the magic. Let's make a switch block and pass it our variable telly. Now in our switch, we make a case with the string of the script noteworthy value we gave to our first trigger. In our case, we thread our teleport player function and pass the arguments of user and the return value of the getRandomDestination function. Then thread the update zombie path function. I think you see where this is going. We create another case with the string of our other teleporter's script noteworthy value and again call the same functions as we did in the first case. And boom, both teleporters work in a single function. No need to make separate functions to control them both individually. Now you can copy and paste the teleporter triggers as many times as you want. Give each of them a new script noteworthy name and update your switch block to add them in as we did with the first two. You think we're done? Nope, I got one more little trick for you. We could also write our switch block like this. Yes, that's right. You could place all your cases together and call the functions underneath of all of them. No more copy-paste cases calling the same functions. Now all you have to do is add in the case when you create a new teleporter. And that's everything. One day we will revisit this and make a more advanced teleporter system, so give ideas on how you'd like to see it function in the comments below. Before I sign off, I wanted to mention that I'm going to start reworking my zombie counter, ammo cache, and weapons roulette videos. I want to make them more in line with this one and the physics video. This will also make it significantly shorter and give me the opportunity to correct some mistakes and explain things better. I hope you enjoyed this video on teleporters. Please like and subscribe if you'd like to see more stuff like this. These videos take a good bit of time to make, so it would help me out greatly if you did. Anyways, thanks for watching, and hope to see you in the next one for more. See you then.